So today we're going to talk about writing for the teaching career, and if you are going for the certificate, the EMI certificate, of course this seminar is very important for you, as are the samples I have on the website, on the seminar website, particularly under the portfolio page as a page for portfolio materials. I think we have, if you've signed up for their certificate, I think the CTO probably has emailed you, so you notice that you need to sign up for a micro-teaching session. So if you're doing the certificate, you need to do a micro-teaching session with me, and you need to do the portfolio materials. So what I would say mainly concerns for now the certificate seekers, not necessarily the rest of you. There will be no seminar next week because of the non-sul that's going on, but in 2 weeks we'll have our last seminar, and the last seminar is on presentation techniques, more advanced presentation techniques. So if you're doing the micro-teaching, that one might be helpful for you, as well as the previous ones where I've talked about presentation techniques. So the seminar in 2 weeks might be helpful for your micro-teaching, as well as for your conference presentation or regular teaching or public speaking events in the future. Today's seminar is most relevant for the portfolio materials that are also required for your certificate. So if you are going for a certificate, there are several portfolio materials that you have to turn in. One is a sample course syllabus for a class that you might teach someday, hypothetically or in reality, or a class that maybe you're teaching right now. The second one is I think it's a CV, curriculum vitae, which we'll talk about in a minute. The third one is a teaching statement or a research statement or a statement of purpose. A statement of purpose for applying for graduate school, a research statement or teaching statement. We'll talk about these kinds of writings today. So today's seminar concerns a number of the materials that you will probably have to write. The most important ones you'll have to write in your academic career. Some of them related to class teaching, some of them related to the job search process, searching for a job, getting a job as an academic person, whether you become a professor or if you go become a Kangsa first or some other kind of teaching or research related career. So we're going to talk about, first of all, the teaching materials like syllabi and lesson plans, particularly the syllabi. Then secondly, the job application, job search materials. So first we are going to talk about a syllabus, and this is a Greek, Latin, plural form syllabus, syllabi. So syllabi, this is a Latin, Latin had masculine and feminine and neuter nouns. Has anyone studied Latin? It's a great language. You should study Latin and Greek. They're really fun. Actually, the Y tells you that it's from Greek. You see academic words with the letter Y. That's a Greek spelling. So a lot of Greek words came into Latin and from Latin into English. So it's kind of a Latin, or Greek Latin borrowing into English. And so it's following the Latin singular plural pattern for masculine nouns plus E syllabi. You could say syllabuses, but that sounds a little silly. We usually say syllabi because it sounds more cool and academic. So, let's say you're teaching a class someday. Well, the first thing you got to do is the syllabus. And these days you have to have your syllabus done before the semester starts, and the school may want you to upload it to its electronic management system, like the EKU system here at Code. So how do you go about designing a course, designing a syllabus? Where do you start? How do you throw together a syllabus? First time you're teaching a class.
We need to think about who we're going to teach and what.
Okay, you're going to. Okay, your goals and objectives, and that sounds kind of abstract and theoretical. Your goals and objectives. And a lot of people will define their goals and objectives and stop there, and not really get very specific. Goals and objectives are a good starting point, but they're kind of broad, kind of abstract. Let's say, oh, I want my students to understand, quantitative research, or I want my students to understand how to interpret poetry, or I want my students to understand market forces in Europe or something like that. Well, it sounds pretty good, but that's not specific enough, because you have to think about how are you going to measure whether they've learned something, what we call assessment, evaluation, and you're going to be able to know on a week-by-week, day-by-day basis what exactly you're going to do. How does it translate to classroom activity? So once you define your goals, and you might put your goals in the syllabus, the problem is sometimes when professors put their goals and objectives in the syllabus, it sounds really vague and fluffy, sounds like a commercial. It doesn't really say anything specific, doesn't really communicate to the students. So what you then want to do is get more specific, kind of more specific objectives, or maybe what we might call learning outcomes, translated to specific learning outcomes, specific things that you would probably measure week by week, day by day. So, if you're teaching German, then by if you're teaching first year German, probably by week 4, you want them to know basic gender patterns of nouns, and by week 8, you want them to be able to decline adjectives, German adjectives, and by week 9, you want them to be able to decline German definite, indefinite articles with adjectives. You want to define specific learning outcomes. If you're teaching statistics, maybe the first, after maybe 4 weeks, you want them to be able to explain on an exam what the Gaussian distribution is, what a probability density function or distribution function is, PDF, or something like that. Or you want them by week 8 to be able to explain to you on an exam in words the difference between a chi-square and a normal or Gaussian distribution. Something specific that you can ask them, on exam. So if you simply say, I want students to understand X, well, understand or know is kind of vague. You want them to be able to do something or explain something to you, say on an exam or homework. So you kind of want to define maybe week by week what specific skills you want them to do. And this will help you to plan things out more specifically and tailor your lectures accordingly. By week 8, by week 10, what kinds of things should a student be able to explain to you on a homework or on an exam or on a quiz? Or what specific skills should they have mastered by week, by week 8, the student should be able to compute an ANOVA test or a t-test, or by hand, or should be able to explain a particular formula, or should be able to drive a particular formula, a particular important formula, or they should be able to understand the basic kinds of metaphors used in ancient Near Eastern literature and explain the most important types of metaphors or figurative literature, linguistic devices in this kind of literature period, specific things like that. Now, when you're teaching kind of from scratch, maybe the first time, you also have several choices. And what I've just described best describes if you're designing a whole new course on your own, maybe from scratch. Maybe it's a class you took before, and maybe you have time to completely design your whole course, your whole syllabus from scratch. From scratch is an expression meaning from nothing, just completely design it yourself. Some of us have that luxury, or some of us may be thrown into that situation. So times as a professor, I've been thrown into a situation where here's a class, I've never taught this before, I haven't had exactly this kind of class myself as a student, and I have to teach this kind of class, like say research methods, to this kind of students. And I have to completely design it from the beginning because I have no previous model. You might be thrown into that kind of situation, where it's especially important to define your objectives and then translate those into specific learning outcomes, specific week-by-week learning outcomes. Other times you might have the luxury of maybe you took the class before, or you know somebody who taught it before, and then you can get that person's syllabus and you can tailor it Again, you probably want to think about the learning outcomes that you want from your students. You probably have to adapt it to your knowledge, your expertise, and to the students' needs. And in some fields, especially where you have really huge books, textbooks, oftentimes the textbook is the outline. The textbook sort of forms the syllabus. Week 1, chapter 1. Week 2, chapter 2. Week 3, chapter 3. Pretty easy, right? Is that a good way to go? A lot of professors do that. If you just follow the book, is that, sounds easy. Is that a good way to teach a class?
Students might think they need some extra
Yeah.
material other than this.
Yeah, they probably,
They might need
yeah, well, textbooks tend to be boring. And for students, if you're teaching Koreans, like yourselves, you've got the added problem that a lot of students don't want to read the textbooks if the textbooks are in English, especially biology texts, biomedical, health science science textbooks, which are really thick and heavy and have a lot of technical vocabulary in English. And it's really hard for the students to do this. And so the book itself is, from the student's point of view, especially for a Korean or non-native speaker of English, the textbook is a big information dump. The textbook is just dumping a lot of information into their brains. And they'll either drown in the information and not really know how to process or understand it, and they will get lost, or they will simply not read it. And from professors, I hear that a lot of students don't like to read the books when they're in English. That's understandable. And one of you kind of hinted at also the students, understanding the students. Your students might not have enough background knowledge, and they might need extra help. And sometimes on the first day of class, you might give kind of a basic quiz, a diagnostic quiz, and find out, do they have enough background knowledge for this class? Have they really taken the prerequisite classes before? Or if they have, do they really understand? If you're teaching an advanced biology class, and they need to already understand from previous classes how cell ion channels work, and they don't, then that's a problem for you. And you might need to give a diagnostic quiz the first week and find out how much do they already know. And if not, you might have to refer them to supplementary materials. The other challenge is for you as a professor, when you're following the book, there's a huge amount of information in the book. And professors try to cover it all in the lectures. Is it a good idea in your lectures to try to cover all of the contents of these big textbooks? No, it's just another information dump. They get an information dump from the book itself, and they may even just avoid that by not reading it. Then the lecture is another information dump, and that's not good either. So it's maybe better if your lectures focus on maybe kind of the big picture, looking at a chapter and just talking about the big picture, the main concepts and how things are related, how the ideas in the book are related to each other, the main concepts in the book. And then they can go back and read the book after your lecture and understand it better. If they understand the concepts, then they can absorb the facts better. And then you can use quizzes, and you can use take-home quizzes, you can use online quizzes in order to save time in class and make them do the reading on their own at home. So those are some options for you in designing syllabus. And again, following the textbook chapters might seem easiest, but it has its problems too. If you're designing your own syllabus from scratch from the beginning, I think that's fun, but what's a big problem there? If you're designing your own syllabus from scratch, from nothing, from the beginning, what's the potential problem?
You might not be well organized.
Yeah, especially the first time you teach a class, you might find after a few weeks your syllabus is not well organized, and your syllabus is not allowing you the flexibility to cover what you need to cover, and you fall behind. And you fall more behind, and fall more behind. And so it might help to kind of have some padding in your syllabus. Allow yourself some flexibility in the syllabus in case you fall behind. If you're designing a syllabus entirely on your own, plan some flexibility into your syllabus the first time. Try not to cover too much stuff. Also for the whole syllabus, as well as for each lesson, time management is often a problem for new teachers. And it's just like you might find yourself falling behind in your syllabus because of time management. Likewise, in a particular class or lecture, you might find yourself falling behind. So for whether it's a lesson plan or the whole syllabus plan, it's also helpful to prioritize things. Decide what is more important and what is less important. If something is more important, you want to make sure you spend enough time there on that. If it's less important, maybe you can kind of rush through it more quickly, or say, oh, we'll talk about that next class, or say, okay, I can't cover this, but here's a YouTube video, or I'll put up a YouTube video for you, or here's some extra handouts you can read on your own, or here's the basic idea, read the text, read pages 50 to 55 in the book that talk about this, because I don't have time to cover this. Here's the basic idea, read it, and then it'll be on the quiz or midterm exam. So those are strategies you can use for managing your time as a teacher. There's some other things in your syllabus you want to put in. Of course, contact information. There's samples on my website, some good samples of how to do this, how to contact you. Your policies, you need to have good detailed policies for your own protection in case students complain. Plagiarism, of course. Plagiarism and cheating, that's an important one. What are you going to do if you catch students cheating? It's good to spell that out in detail, and there's a sample, I think, on my website where I do that. By the way, as a teacher, as a professor, it's not too hard to catch plagiarism. How do you tell if a student has plagiarized in his or her essay or research paper? How do you catch plagiarism?
You probably would have read a lot in that field, so if you see the same thing. If you don't have a specific software program to
Yeah. So a lot of schools in the U.S. use particular software packages to detect plagiarism, or web services like plagiarismdetection.com. As a professor, you don't necessarily have to do that. I think when you know the material, you can tell when students plagiarize. What are some specific signs that a student has plagiarized in a research paper?
they don't use quotes much.
Okay. Maybe they don't use quotations or citations. They don't cite the source. Copy and paste. It's easy to tell copy and paste jobs, and they've copied and pasted stuff, like from a Google search, because one, there's a style change. It's different from the usual writing style, and even from one paragraph to another in an essay, there's a sudden style change, or suddenly there's a paragraph that's just in perfect English, and it's very beautiful, academic, insightful stuff. And it's pretty obvious. And if you're really suspicious and you're not sure though, you can use Google. You can put quotation marks. If you suspect this is a phrase that the student has, or this is maybe this paragraph the student has plagiarized, we'll take a phrase from it, type it in quotation marks, type the suspicious phrase in quotation marks in Google. So if you put it in Google with quotation marks around the phrase, Google will search for that exact phrase. And I have caught students this way. Because they plagiarized, they copied and pasted. Well, I just do that. I put it in Google with the quotation marks around the phrase. Voila, I find the PDF that the student plagiarized from an academic journal online that they copied and pasted from. I say, here's the link that you copied from. Here's your F. F stands for fun, I guess. Those and other style shifts you catch. I also spell out things like, think in advance, what's your policy going to be for when the student misses class? Do they want them calling you and say, hey, what did I miss? I tell them, okay, first get your notes from your classmate and then see me about missing materials or things you don't understand. You want to publish your phone number for them, or just by email? How do you want them to contact you? How do you want to handle absences? How many absences, or how many times late is okay? Things like that. What to do about missing or late work, emergencies, they miss an exam, all that kind of stuff. I even specify things like I tell students, don't wear perfume or cologne in my class because it bothers my allergies. Things like that. Behavior, academic integrity, plagiarism. My expectations, like I expect you to perform graduate level work, I expect you to participate in class discussions, I expect you to participate in group activities. And of course your grading policy should be spelled out clearly in a fair way. How much for midterm final, how much for participation in class. If you want the students to participate in class, we can make that like 10 or 15% of your grade, especially in social science and language classes. Like 15%, 10% of your grade depends on how much you participate in class activities and class discussions, as well as attendance, things like that. So spell out your grading policy, have a clearly spelled out grading policy. It has to be a grading, if you're giving a lot of homework and quizzes and exams, think about, is it too much? Is it too much of a workload? And is it also something that you can readily calculate? Is it something you can easily manage in say a spreadsheet program? Or is it so complicated and so much work that it's going to be suffering and torture for the students, and it's going to be hard for you to grade all of these papers, and it's going to be hard for you to calculate the grading system in your spreadsheet? Those are things to think about. When it comes to lesson plans, and also in designing your whole course, is it going to be mainly lecture? Is it going to be lecture discussion, or lecture discussion with group activities? Is it going to be lecture lab? Is there going to be a hands-on learning component? Is there advantages and disadvantages? You might think you can get a lot of information through lectures. Is lecturing, just a lecture-based class, a good idea though? Is a pure lecture-based course a good idea?
It might be very boring for students.
Boring, yes. It's boring, and are students going to remember a lot of your lecture?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe just enough to pass the final exam. But after the final exam, are they going to remember all of those lecture contents? Probably not. And studies show that they often forget after a lecture-based course, educational studies. So lecture discussion's better, or if you have interactive group activities in your course, that's even better for them to understand things more deeply, or hands-on activities, group problem-solving activities, things like that. They will learn better and remember things better. You may not be able to cover everything in a lecture that way, but then what's the point if they're just going to forget after a few months? So those are some considerations, and there are some more examples on the website. And if you want more, from my website you can link to my main website and then go to my pedagogical handouts page too. So there's some things to think about the teaching materials. Any question about teaching materials aspect? Okay, so it's one thing to teach, but the first step for many of you is getting the teaching job. How many of you see yourselves more maybe going towards a teaching job someday? Some of you. How many of you are more likely to go for more of a research type job or a research professorship? More research oriented. Okay. How many of you may not do an academic job at all? There's actually nothing wrong with that. Because universities train out too many PhDs, and there aren't enough professorships for all these PhD students. But, of course, the government sector, private sector would be glad to employ PhDs. Not everybody is meant to be a professor. You kind of have to really enjoy research and teaching in order to be a good professor. And so be honest with yourself. If you don't really enjoy teaching and research both, You don't have to become a professor. Don't feel like there's any pressure for you to become a professor. There's no shame in taking a job with a government or NGO or a corporate job where you can use your PhD skills. Even if it seems like a non-related job. You have, for example, in your PhD or master's process, probably learned analytical skills, thinking skills, problem-solving skills, or knowledge that you can transfer to a different kind of job, that you can maybe transfer to a non-academic job, maybe a private research job or corporate or government job. So if you think that might be the case, start thinking now about what we call transferable skills. Those are skills that maybe you learn in grad school that maybe you can transfer to a different area, a different domain. Maybe you study, I don't know, maybe you got a PhD in education or social science area. Well, maybe you can apply those skills in a different way, in a different sphere, working for a government or for a bank or something, where your analytical skills and research skills can be useful. So think about how your skills might transfer to some kind of a non-academic job if you're not sure if you want to become a professor or work as a consul for 5 years before struggling to get a professorship. So that's something you want to think about first, and then you have to get there. You have to get the job. If you are going for some kind of an academic job, teaching, research, private research institutes, university teaching, consa, whatever, or if you're going to apply for grad school in another country, and especially in the North American system, if you're also going to apply for a teaching assistantship or a research assistantship to fund your graduate studies in North America. You have to think now about your application materials. And there are examples on the website, but if you're applying for a job, one of the first things you do is a cover letter. So whether it's a corporate job or if you're applying for a teaching job, any kind of a regular job, or even a teaching assistantship in an American university, a research assistantship, you're going to do a cover letter. So-called because you put it on top of your resume or CV if you mail in a hard copy. So what goes in your cover letter? What do you say in your cover letter?
My background.
And something about your background in terms of what?
In terms of what I want to do for that company.
Okay. Okay. Something about your background that you can say, this is something I have to offer to you as a potential employer, as a company, what kind of background and skills and training I have that I can offer to you, my future employer. Or if you're applying for a teaching job, your background in terms of what you can do as a teacher at this school. So you probably begin by simply telling them what job you're applying for in the first sentence. That makes it easier for them when they read the letter. And then you go into your background. This is about selling yourself, so to speak. Your training, your expertise, perhaps something that maybe profoundly influenced you in your intellectual development or your training or expertise. That's more of an SOP type stuff. And I think there are some examples on the website of academic cover letters and such. So I have a bit of experience myself writing letters and doing jobs with cover letters, where basically I talk about my intellectual background, my specialization. This is my research specialization. This is how my research interests have evolved from X to Y, and this is why I would be a good professor or a good teacher at your school, your institute. And I might say something else about myself as a person. And if it's a teaching job, maybe with my background, these are the kinds of courses that I could teach in your department. Or these are the kinds of abilities and expertise that I could bring to your company. So basically, selling yourself. There's a lot more that could be said about cover letters, but we don't have time. We have to move on to CVs and resumes. So we have, you know, a resume. Now that looks like resume. So the word resume came from French, and you have at least one accent mark. Although to be really formal, if you want to be really formal, there are two accent marks. These are French accent marks because resume comes from French. So that's the most formal because in French it has two accent marks. In French it's résumé. Anyone speak French? Résumé is a thing that hangs down the back of your throat to say the R in French. Anyway, so you know what a resume is, and there's it basically has your contact info at the top. It has your education, all of your education experience in reverse chronological order from most recent going back. Your work experience. If you don't have work experience, highlight anything else. Involvement in campus activities, campus clubs, and showcase your leadership skills, any honors and awards, military service, anything like that. There are many examples on the website. If you're applying for a specific job, your resume is going to maybe begin with an objective statement saying what position you're applying for, and such. And there are any other special skills you have, like if you know certain statistical procedures or special training you've had, certificates you've gotten. Those are things you'd mentioned in a resume, different sections. Now in academia, we have what's called a CV, or curriculum vitae, or sometimes for short vita. This is Latin for course of one's life, or just vita, or life. This is Latin again, course of one's life. The AE in Latin is a possessive here, of one's life. So what is a CV?
Academic resume.
It's basically an academic resume. So how is it different from a regular resume?
Maybe you put your published articles first.
Okay, so you list things like publications, conference presentations, other kinds of academic stuff. So this is going to be one page. Companies don't want a resume more than one page. If there's any more than that, they're not going to look at it. The only exception would being if you've got years of working experience and you're applying for kind of mid-upper level management positions or executive positions. So maybe when you're in your 40s or 50s and you're a manager and you're applying for another management or executive position, then a 2-page resume might be okay. Otherwise, resumes are one page. These are for companies. For academic positions, we use a CV. And that could be teaching jobs, teaching assistantship, research assistantship, any kind of research job, research institute, professorship, other kinds of teaching and research jobs that are academic in nature. And so the CV is maybe more flexible. You can customize it depending on your field and what kinds of things are relevant to your field. So it could be as long as you want. I've seen some there's some star professors whose CV goes on for miles and miles. There's a famous linguist named Deborah Tannen at Georgetown University. She used to have her CV on her website. It used to be a single file because it's so long. She's got so many publications, and she broke it up into separate files. One for popular writings, one for academic publications, and such, because she's like a big academic star. So you're going to have, if you've got any publications, that's a separate section in your CV. If you've got any conference presentations, in fact, if you're a grad student, it's best to get started by doing conference presentations, get something out there that you can then maybe later write up and submit as a journal article. In some fields, maybe doing book reviews, when there are sometimes email lists in certain fields where they announce, here's some new academic books in the field for review, and you contact them and say, hey, I want to write a review for this book, and get a review published in a journal. It's not a regular journal article, but it's a start. It gives you some experience, especially in social sciences. What else can go in a CV? Publications, conference presentations, what else?
Papers.
Yeah, papers, publications. That includes your dissertations and thesis research. What else?
And some certification.
Yeah, any kind of certifications, certificates, licenses, any special training you've gotten. You've attended like a summer training program for statistical analysis at the University of Michigan or something, well-known like that. Put anything like that. A TESOL certificate. Put that. What else?
Teaching experience.
Okay. So along with it could be you're going to have your job experience anyway, and that your teaching experience could be there. Or if you've been teaching a while, you could have a separate section where you give more details about the courses you've taught. And I did that on my sample CV on my website, where I've taught a number of different courses, and also seminars. In my case, I've done a lot of non-credit seminars for professors, for Kansa, and this seminar series. So I've got all those kinds of seminars and courses that I've taught. So I've got that detailed in a separate section on my CV. Because I might be using that to apply for an academic job, someday. What else? Okay, so kind of depends on what you've got. You can call those honors and awards, something like that. So any kind of scholarships, honors, awards you've gotten, anything like that since college. By the way, resumes and CVs start with college. You don't do high school stuff, starting from college. In some fields, you might have projects you've worked on. In business or science, you might have particular projects you've worked on, collaborative projects. In some fields, you might have recitals or music recitals that you've done, performances you've done, exhibitions that you've done, and humanities type stuff. Basically anything. I mean, a CV can be pretty flexible. So you can customize it to your particular field and your particular skills and what you're applying for. If you're applying for a teaching assistantship as a grad student, you might list relevant courses that you have taken as a grad student. And if you're a professor, maybe courses that you've taught. Other outside speaking events that you've done, where you're an invited speaker. So you got the CV. And of course, usually on a resume, you don't list your references because you don't have space. And if they want references, they'll contact you. But on a CV, you can put your references at the end. Maybe 3 people, like professors of yours. So you can go ahead and include that on the CV. Because there's no length limit on the CV. You can make it as long as you want. Okay. Now, if you're applying for a grad school, say in North America or somewhere else, you're going to write a statement of purpose, an SOP. Usually 300 to 500 words, although often the particular university or department will tell you how long they want it to be. And nowadays it's online, so that might restrict you. So in applying for a graduate school, like a PhD program, what do you put in your SOP?
The reason why I'm applying for a certain school.
Yeah. So why are you applying for that certain school? So let's say if you're applying for, maybe you want to apply for the University of Illinois, which is where I studied. Why would you want to study there? I mean, it's a boring city. I mean, it's a boring place to live. Why would you apply for the University of Illinois?
To research or study some certain topic.
Okay. It might be a really good school for your area. Like, what's your area?
I'm in psychology.
Psychology. Oh, definitely Illinois. Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those are 3 great schools for psychology. So it might be the school's reputation in general for psychology. Or maybe you know your research specialization in psychology, and that school is particularly good for that research specialization. Do you have a specialization?
Me? You mean the department, inside the department of
Yeah,
psychology?
so within psychology, what's your specialization?
I'm especially interested in social psychology and
Social psychology.
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, maybe Illinois. There's a couple of famous social
I mean,
psychology.
the 3 schools you mentioned are really top schools
Yes.
in psychology.
Yes, I took some courses in the psych department in Illinois. So maybe you're interested in this particular area of social psychology, and there is a professor at Illinois whom you want to work with. Maybe you like his researching. Maybe you want to work with him. Maybe you want to work with Professor Neil Rose at the University of Illinois and his work on counterfactual thinking, social psychology, or something like that. So the more specific, the better it is. The more interesting you will be, the more specific you can be about your reasons for applying for that school. And it's not, now if your reason for applying to that school is, well, my girlfriend is going to that school, so I want to follow her, that's kind of probably not too persuasive. But if you have a specific reason, like, I really want to work for this professor, or your school is really good for this particular area, as well as your research facilities, your library, other things like that. What else goes in an SOP? What else do you put in an SOP?
And what am I going to do after I finish the
Yes.
future plan?
So they're interested in what you're going to do because they are making an investment in you. They're going to take you, they're going to spend a lot of hours, not just taking you to the courses, but the professors are going to spend time mentoring you. They may provide you funding if you're lucky. Good luck in America, but anyway, with that right now, but still it's possible. They're making a big investment in you, and so if your goal is to get a degree and then become a housewife or such, they may not be interested in that. But if you seem promising, if you seem to demonstrate, intelligence and research background and a knowledge of the field, and they think you're probably going to be a good researcher, scholar in the field, especially if it's a PhD, they're going to want to take you. So if you talk about your research career interests after that, it doesn't necessarily have to be in academia. Maybe you want to work for the government and affect government policy, or it could be other things too. Do you want to apply for a master's or PhD?
I apply for PhD.
Probably. Now there are a few fields that are just masters only, and maybe at some schools. In this case, it's okay. Maybe that's more of an educational, practical kind of program. But for a lot of programs, they hope that you're going to go for a PhD. If it's a program that offers a PhD, it's better to say that you're interested in a PhD. Maybe you're not, and I don't want you to lie, but you probably want to seriously consider getting a PhD. Maybe you'll get in, and maybe you'll like it, and maybe you do want to do a PhD. If so, have some concrete goals and plans in mind for what you want to do after getting a PhD. Because if it's a PhD program and you say, I just want a master's, they probably won't take you. Because you don't look so attractive. What else do you put in an SOP? Well, if you're applying for, let's say, linguistics, and you say, well, I'm interested in phonology, or maybe syntax, or morphology, or maybe sociolinguistics, or applied linguistics, or psycholinguistics. Does that sound good? They want somebody who has a clear idea in mind of what they want to do. The more specific you can identify what you want to research. Like, again, in your case, maybe you'll say, I'm interested in studying counterfactual thinking in social psychology, personality psychology. The more specific you have of a research idea, something that would be maybe a research topic for your PhD dissertation, the more attractive you'll be to that department when they're looking at your application. So if you just say, I'm interested in A, B, C, D, and F, that seems like you're all over the place. You haven't really decided what you want to do. But if you can identify something more specific, then that's better. Now, you might say, I want to do X, and say, I have this really specific thing in mind. Does that mean you are committed to that once you get there and you have to do that particular research topic and you can't change? Not necessarily. Because they realize that people's interests might change once they get into the program. So that happened to me. I applied for linguistics. That was my first graduate program. And I said I wanted to do this. Well, after I got in and took some other courses, I discovered, well, I really like this. And that's okay, because they realize that students' interests might change. But what they're looking for is the kind of person who can at least identify something specific. The kind of person who could articulate a specific research interest. Even if your interests might change, they're looking for the kind of person who can articulate something intelligent and specific in terms of a research interest. It's also important because when you get there, they want to assign you to an advisor, a particular professor who will be your advisor, your mentor. They want to assign you to someone appropriate at first. Even again, if your interests might change later, that's okay. You can change your advisor later on if you want to. Again, they're looking for a person who sounds like they know what they want to do. As a person who's kind of disciplined, knows enough that they can articulate specific research interest. You might say something again about, you mentioned earlier, background. Again, your intellectual background in terms of how your interests in this particular field have developed. Why do you want to study this particular field? What are your goals, your motivations, or what got you interested in this particular field? And that's going to say something about why you're applying, what you might do in the future, and such. And it also says something about you and your intellectual nature. So it helps if you say something about your background that explains, one, why you're applying to this program, and two, why are you an interesting person? Why would you be a good student, a good future psychologist, or a good future economist, or a good future linguist? What is it about you that looks cool in terms of your, that shows that you're hardworking, you're disciplined, you've got character, you've got intellect, and you've got particular research interests. So when you describe your background, they're looking for somebody who's got an interesting background, who can explain how they got interested in this field, why they're interested, and what they might do in the field. So your particular goals, research goals. A couple of other documents. When you're applying for a professorship or a teaching job at different schools, they might require a couple of other things. If it's more of a teaching-focused job, I think teaching is great. I like both teaching and research, but I kind of like teaching a little bit better. It's kind of more fun, but my research usually follows as a result of what I'm teaching, or my research often influences what I'm teaching. But you might be applying for a job that's more teaching-focused. Maybe it's not a research university, and that's fine, because we need good teachers, people who enjoy teaching. They might ask you for a teaching statement or a teaching philosophy statement. And this is going to be basically a description of your teaching philosophy. A lot of people, when they write these teaching statements, it sounds kind of hollow or fake. It sounds like a commercial advertisement. They often sound insincere. And so in order to avoid that kind of a typical run-of-the-mill, boring teaching statement, a couple of things you might think about if you're in this situation. How would you teach? Explain what your classrooms would look like. How would you conduct classes? How would you get the students engaged? What kind of group activities would you use? What kind of things did you do in the class? Also think about, in your field, in the classes you teach, what things are perhaps harder for students to understand? And how would you teach that? How would you help students overcome these difficulties? If you're teaching biology, and from your experience, you remember that learning ion channel pumps were kind of hard. Well, think about, okay, what's the problem here? Why is it hard for students? And then what are some creative ways that you would teach that in order to help students understand? Or students have misunderstandings about the theory of evolution. How would you address their misunderstandings? How would you help them to understand what evolution is and isn't? and the changing theoretical paradigm and evolutionary theory right now. If you want to go further, you can look at your teaching philosophy. People, when they start teaching, they often don't really think about why they're doing things and what's their underlying philosophy. They just teach the way they were taught. So you kind of teach the way that your professors taught you. Or if you had a really bad professor, maybe you try to do something really different from what he did. But usually new teachers basically follow the way that they were taught before. If your lecture is taught by just a plain lecture style, if your professors use a plain lecture style, it's very likely when you start teaching, you might do the same, because that's what you know. And you might want to think about why do you do things. So you go to, I think there's a link on my website to a teaching philosophy statement that will actually make you, most of us don't know what our teaching philosophy is. You have no idea because you've never thought about it. But you've kind of implicitly developed one from your habits as a student and maybe as a victim of some professor's lectures and such. You've probably developed one over the years implicitly, unconsciously. And so there's a teaching philosophy inventory, philosophy of adult education inventory, that will kind of ask you some questions and will kind of tell you what your philosophy is. It will tell you maybe in terms of some educational jargon or lingo, which you don't necessarily have to use in your teaching philosophy statement, but you could use this to find out maybe what are your implicit assumptions or ideas about who you are as a teacher, or the kind of teacher that you like to be. Maybe it tells you that you're like this, but you think, I don't like that, I would rather be like this. Well, you can write about, well, I would like to become more of a progressive teacher, more of a progressive educator, and these are some things I'm going to do. Or I am kind of a classical liberal type of educator, and this is, these are my strengths as a classical liberal or as a progressive educator. You don't have to use these terms, but it will kind of give you some idea of what to write about, and there's some more examples. You can think about, what is the field like? What is, if you're a linguist, what is linguistics? What is it, what is the field about, and how do you convey that to students? Kind of the paradigm, the worldview of the field. What is the worldview or the paradigm? This is kind of a philosophical term, but the paradigm. If you're a linguist, what is the paradigm of linguistics? What is the field about? What are you trying to do? Because your freshman students taking your class may have no idea what your field really is about. What is linguistics? They think it has to do with just learning languages better. Well, it's a lot more than that. It's a lot deeper than that. Or they have really wrong views about what psychology is, and they think of Skinner and Freud, and psychology is way, way beyond that now. So what is the field about? What are the main ideas, the goals? How do you communicate that to new students? That's a teaching philosophy statement. In other jobs, you might be asked to write a research statement, especially if it's more of some jobs at more of a heavy research university, or if you're applying for a postdoc. That is a postdoctoral job, which is required more or less in a lot of fields, the more science and heavy social science areas, many areas of psychology, for example, and sciences. You kind of need to do a postdoc before you can become a professor. I don't think it's common in humanities, but you might need to do a research statement. This is going to be sort of, well, what would a research statement be? I've got maybe one example on the website, but basically it's going to be, if you're applying for a postdoc or a research professorship, that's mainly geared towards, more focused on research, or your expectation is mainly research-based. The school is going to employ you as a professor. They want you to do a lot of research. Yeah, you're going to teach, but they mainly care about your research. So they might ask you for a research statement. Well, you're going to talk about, one, what's your research background? What kind of research have you done? What kind of cool, interesting stuff have you found as a researcher? What kinds of things have you studied? What kind of experiments have you done? What results have you found? This is going to be one thing. Another thing is, what kind of research training have you had? What kind of research methods have you learned? So what's your experience as a researcher? And then third, what do you want to do if you're, in our postdoc program or at our university? What kind of research do you want to do in the future? What are your research plans, your goals? What are your research questions? What things are you interested in? What issues do you want to research? And why? And how are you going to go about doing that? What kind of studies do you want to conduct? Something like that. So that's a research statement, and some places might ask for a research statement. Something that's kind of similar to a research statement is a grant proposal. And I have a few samples on the website too. And this would be probably after. So maybe you want a research grant from maybe a university or from a government agency. Maybe a government agency that funds research. And this might be either if you're a professor and you want to apply for a big government grant for your research, or maybe you're doing a PhD dissertation which requires some funding. You need to get some funding for your PhD dissertation, especially in experimental psychology, experimental social sciences, and science where you need money for equipment, for paying subjects, for buying materials for your research. Maybe you need a research grant. So it's going to be, you might briefly explain your research background and what's your training and experience, but basically you're going to be giving kind of a detailed proposal about your research project. So it's basically like a proposal for your project. You're going to define what are your hypotheses, what are your objectives, what kind of theories. Are you looking at some particular theories or hypotheses? Are you comparing two different theories or hypotheses in your research? What do you expect? What results do you expect? And what would be the implications of your results? So it's sort of like maybe when you get to the dissertation stage, before you start your PhD dissertation, you might also likewise need to write a research proposal to your advisor, to your department for your PhD dissertation. And a grant proposal would be sort of similar, except in some ways it would be more detailed, where you actually also need to specify kind of a timeline. You're going to need to specify a timeline, and you're going to need to specify a budget. How much money do you want? How do you justify your expenses? So timeline and budget is also going to go into a grant proposal. When I was a PhD, I was doing experimental psycholinguistic research, and I applied for research grants. I got one from my university, and I applied for a nice one from the U.S. government, the National Science Foundation. I think so, and I didn't get it. I didn't get that one. That would have been really nice. It would have looked really great on my CV, and it would have really been very helpful for me financially. I got a school research grant from a university, paid for part of my research expenses. The rest I had to pay for myself. Now, the reason I didn't get the government research grant, the government research grants are pretty competitive. They're harder to get. And let me tell you why I didn't get it, probably, maybe to help you. So if you submit a grant proposal to a government research agency, the agency will probably find out 3 reviewers who are supposedly experts in the same field or similar field as yours. And they will review your project proposal and give their feedback. So I saw my feedback, and one of them was a complete idiot who didn't really know anything about the field at all. The second person only knew a little bit about the field, and so his or her comments were not very helpful or insightful either. Didn't really understand why I was doing this particular research procedure, because they didn't really understand this research area that I was doing. So I had 2 reviewers, maybe 2 reviewers who were really not good reviewers. But I had a 3rd reviewer who was kind of tough. And it was mainly probably because of his opposition. I think I might know who it is. Because in my grant proposal, I was saying I'm going to compare two theories. Let's call them A and B. I'm going to compare two theories. And I said I'm expecting to find results that will kind of prove or show that B is a better theory. And these were existing theories in the literature. Where it turns out that my reviewer was a big name in theory A, and he didn't like this because I was kind of opposing his theory. So I made the mistake of overcommitting to one particular theory or hypothesis in my grant proposal. And partly because of that, I didn't get it. And it turns out that my dissertation really didn't, in the end, my end results didn't really address meaningfully A or B. Instead, my dissertation results had more to do with C and D, and I found, well, C doesn't work, but D is pretty good. So it had nothing to do, and I thought it would address A and B, but it didn't. In the end, it really addressed C and D. And so I didn't get a good research grant, partly because of that. So watch out, don't be too committed to one theory, because your reviewer might be from that particular theoretical paradigm. So I've got a few examples of grant proposals, research proposals on my website too. Those are some things you can do for your portfolio assignment. And there are examples on my website under the portfolio page, because there are too many to put under the EAP seminar page. I put them all, I think, on the portfolio page. There's a bunch. Some of them are my own examples. Some of them I've adapted from other sources and such. So again, for your portfolio, a CV, a sample course syllabus, and then either an SOP, a teaching statement, or a research statement for the portfolio, as well as micro-teaching, if you're going for the EMI certificate. So, do you have any questions? Yeah, I say 10 to 12 minutes. Your micro-teaching would be 10 to 12 minutes, and it could be like a conference presentation. It could be like a summary lecture. You could give it could be an intro lecture or kind of a summary lecture, or it could be just actually part of a longer lecture, as if it were part of a longer lecture. So something like that would count for micro-teaching. And I think.
Do you want us to make some handout or syllabus for that?
For micro-teaching, it's up to you. You don't have to do. You can do a handout. You can do PowerPoint. You can do Prezi. You can use whiteboard. It really depends on your field. Economists, for example, and language teachers like whiteboards. I like whiteboards. As you can see, I don't use PowerPoint. Sometimes I use Prezi, but it didn't work today. That's okay. Hopefully in 2 weeks the Prezi will work, because I really need that, and in 2 weeks I'll talk about presentation skills. I'll show you Prezi, which is kind of cool. Other questions?
Sorry. Could you elaborate what a research statement is? How you would run after a research statement, like just one-page summary of what we want to research about?
Okay, so a research statement is often used to apply for a postdoc, or sometimes to apply for a professorship, where they really, really expect you to produce a lot of research. So it's going to include your past research. It's going to describe your past and current research interests, and your future research plans. So if you're applying for a professorship, you're going to probably outline various types of research that you want to do. If you're applying for a postdoc, you're probably going to specify one particular research focus for a postdoc, and probably it's going to be one that's suited to what the postdoc advertises for. I almost got a postdoc. I was applying for jobs when I was finishing my PhD. I applied for professorships and postdocs in the US and Canada and Europe and Asia. I almost got a postdoc. It would have been nice, but they said they liked you, but okay, there was somebody else that liked slightly more relevant research topic. Because I had kind of an interesting research topic in mind for a postdoc. So a postdoc is going to specify one particular research project that you want to do. But if it's for a professorship, you can do it either way. You can apply for a postdoc. You can write your document like you're applying for a postdoc, or for a professorship where you're probably going to outline maybe more of a research agenda. These are some of the different things I want to research. These are maybe a few different research projects I want to undertake. This is my research interest, and I'm going to look at it by doing research project, A, B, and C. These are the things I want to do. These are the research methods I'm going to use. So you're talking about your past, your current interests, and what you want to do in the future. Okay. Oh, that time's up. So I will see you in 2 weeks, some of you, or hopefully see some of you at micro-teaching. And I think they told you that the portfolio requirements are due also, I think December 7th, which is the day of the last micro-teaching. So see some of you later.